forget the thought-provoking cryptic hyperbole, I'm just gonna go out and say it. Jon Bernthal is officially my favorite Punisher. Greetings fanboys and fangirls, I'm ERod and I'm the Blockbuster Buster. Now every true blue comic book fan knows about the Punisher's unorthodox introduction as a mainstream character. How he was initially only supposed to be a one-time adversary for Spider-Man, only relegated to appear in Amazing Spider-Man number 129, and never be seen again. But Gary Conway's and John Romita Sr.'s Vengeful Vigilante proved to be so popular that he was soon promoted to the titular role that he has held to this very day. And why do I bring this up? Because I find it incredibly appropriate that Jon Bernthal's introduction into the MCU as the Punisher was partially due to Spider-Man. For those of you who don't know, Tom Holland, the latest actor to take on the role of Marvel's Amazing Arachnid, helped Jon Bernthal film his audition for the Punisher while they were together on the set of Pilgrimage. So very much like in the comics, we wouldn't have the Punisher if it wasn't for Spider-Man. Now before I jump into this, I have a few disclaimers. Number 1. While this might be the first season of the Punisher solo series, the events of the show pick up right after the events of Daredevil Season 2, in which the Punisher and the Man Without Fear went head-to-head. And due to the heavy continuity between the two shows, I highly recommend that you watch Daredevil Season 2 before you watch Punisher. But in order to enjoy that, you might want to watch Daredevil Season 1 first. And while that might be incredibly time-consuming since each of these seasons consists of 13 episodes that are between 50 minutes to an hour long, the good news is these shows are great, so you won't regret watching them.
Welcome back, Frank.
Disclaimer number 2. Punisher most definitely lives up to its name, as this is the most violent, gory, and unforgiving of the Marvel Netflix shows. So it goes without saying, but this show is not for kids, or for anyone with a weak constitution, so watch it at your own risk. And my third and final disclaimer, there will be spoilers ahead. So if you haven't seen Punisher Season 1, you might want to stop the video here. You were warned. Now that that's out of the way, everybody get locked and loaded, and let's get to work.
The Plot.
The Punisher finally wraps up his revenge spree as he finds and eliminates the last few men responsible for the death of his family. And thus, he prepares to give up the Death Skull and live a life of obscurity. When suddenly he's brought back into the fold by a man named David Lieberman, aka Micro, a former data analyst who was severely screwed over by a covert government group, who inadvertently uncovered evidence that they pretty much did the same thing to Frank Castle, setting the events into motion that ended in the death of his family and him becoming the Punisher. Developing a bond with his new ally, together they embark on a new mission, to expose the men that ruined their lives, as these men are nothing more than wolves in sheep's clothing, nothing more than common criminals hiding in plain sight, and they too will be punished.
Cast and characters.
Now before we start talking about the amazing cast of this series, I would like to give major props to all the magnificent actors from Daredevil who made guest appearances. From everyone's favorite snitch, Turk Barrett, man, that guy gets his ass kicked by comic book characters so often one day he's gonna be a Jeopardy question. Detective Brett Mahoney, who brings a good amount of grounded levity to every show he's in.
This look like the work of a dead man to you.
And of course, the beauty that tamed the beast, Karen Page, played by Deborah Ann Woll. I sincerely applaud the creator's decision to include Karen in this show, as she was one of the first to sympathize with Frank and expose his humanity, albeit briefly. Henceforth, Karen has become Frank's unofficial conscience, the angel sitting on one shoulder while the Punisher is the devil sitting on the other, egging him on to give in to his baser instincts. Karen represents Frank's last shred of humanity, and he will fight tooth and nail not to lose that.
Listen. I don't want to say this once, okay? So is Karen. If something happens to her, okay. Please.
Alright, let's move on to the villains. Rollins, the pencil-pushing stooge who doesn't mind signing death warrants but doesn't like getting his hands dirty. and Billy the Butte Russo, Frank's former Marine Corps buddy turned mercenary. Now, both of these villains have been accused of not being as good as the previous Marvel Netflix villains. And while I don't necessarily disagree with this, I still feel that these two characters were still way better than the villains from the Defenders. I like the idea that there was no vendetta, revenge, or conspiracy behind Rollins ordering the shootout that killed Frank's family. There was absolutely nothing personal about it, even though Frank permanently blinded him in one eye. For Rollins, giving the kill order was just business. So Frank takes it upon himself to make it personal, to the point that the usually composed government goon will lower himself to finally get his hands dirty. And yes, the symbolism of him wearing gloves while doing so is not lost to me.
Whoever you are, I'm coming for you.
But the best villain in the series is most definitely Billy Russo, played brilliantly by Prince Caspian himself, Ben Barnes. Initially, when promoting the series, Marvel announced that Ben was playing Microchip, who of course ended up being played by Eben Moss-Backrack. They did this as part of an effort to hide Ben's character's true identity, as any comic book fan worth a salt knows that Billy Russo is the Punisher's arch nemesis, Jigsaw. And that way, no fan would watch this show expecting Billy to become the comic book villain throughout the course of the series, which I have to admit would have been terribly distracting. In fact, the whole season is pretty much Jigsaw's origin, which I didn't mind, as we get to see 13 episodes of who this guy used to be before he became a supervillain. And now we can look forward to seeing him as Jigsaw in Season 2. Now, for those of you who don't know, in the comics, Billy Russo was not a former Marine or a friend of Frank Castle. He was simply a very handsome mobster who the Punisher sent sailing face first through a plate glass window, permanently disfiguring the villain beyond recognition, and henceforth taking on the moniker of Jigsaw. The question is, did the changes made to the character in the series bother me? And my answer is no. Personally, I found Billy's journey from Frank's trusted friend to his mortal enemy to be fascinating. They were brothers in arms, they were family. Frank's kids would call him Uncle Billy for Pete's sake. But money and success was far more important to him than loyalty, so he made a choice. A terrible, terrible choice that ended in the creation of the deadliest vigilante in the Marvel Universe. And while I might still be a fan of his comic book counterpart, I have to admit that this version is far more interesting.
God damn, Frankie. I love to watch you work.
Alright, let's talk heroes. First, I want to give some props to the supporting players. Starting with Curtis Hoyle, Frank's former Marine Corps buddy and unofficial medic. Some folks complained that Rosario Dawson didn't make her traditional appearance as Claire Temple, aka the Night Nurse, known for dispensing wisdom and patching up superheroes. And if there was something that the Punisher needed throughout the course of these 13 episodes, was some major patchwork. Now, as much as I love Claire, her absence didn't bother me, as it made sense. Frank Castle is a very paranoid man, with some major trust issues. Hell, it takes him a whole episode before he even starts to trust Micro. So I just don't see him going to someone he doesn't know to treat his injuries. He would go to someone that he knows he can trust, and that is Curtis. Loyal and dedicated. And while he might not agree with what Frank does, he's not one to abandon a fellow Marine in need.
You think any of this is gonna make any difference?
Look, I have to believe that. I mean...
Yeah, for you. But what about him?
Straddling the fence between being an ally and antagonist is Special Agent Madani. Now, this character has been heavily accused of being a complete and total knockoff of Detective Misty Knight from Luke Cage. And I have to agree, the similarities are just too overt to ignore. They are both tough as balls, career-driven women with a chip on their shoulder who have a penchant for sleeping with the wrong guys. They completely misjudge the heroes from their respective shows. They both see their comic relief partner die, and ultimately, they are both punished in spite of their best efforts. So yes, Madani is very much the Kmart version of Misty Knight, but in spite of this, Amber Rose Reba still delivered an excellent, dramatic, and captivating performance. And while her character may not have been very original, she was still a great foil and adversary to the brutal, unrelenting Punisher. Their cat and mouse relationship is very reminiscent of Richard Kimball and Sam Gerard from The Fugitive. and the car chase between the two was pretty badass. Alright, let's talk about the crown jewel of this series and the element that makes this show truly worth watching. And that is the relationship between Punisher and Micro. Two disparate characters that under any other circumstances would have nothing to do with one another, but have now been thrusted together due to horrible unforeseen circumstances. And while they might be as different as night and day, the two have a very legitimate and palpable bond. And their scenes together are an absolute delight.
Where'd you get that?
I made this one.
What do you mean you made it? Did you make me one? No. This stuff was all in the fridge, you know?
In his solo series, Frank Castle is going through the last stages of his transformation as the Punisher. At first, the persona was just a means to an end, something that he used to get his revenge. However, throughout this series, we see Frank realize that there is nothing else that he can be. Once he took a walk in the world of the Punisher, his awareness of the world of crime, injustice, and violence doesn't just go away. Frank's journey throughout the series leads to the inevitable realization that the Punisher is not a persona, but who Frank is now. He realizes Frank Castle really did die on that terrible day at the park with his family, and all that is left is the Punisher. Making it all the more appropriate that the climax of this series takes place at the very carousel where the Punisher was born.
The woman. The kid. Where'd they take him?
I don't know, man. That was need to know. You know how it is. I don't know anything.
Fair enough.
Favorite episode.
Now, it's been a while since I've singled out one episode from a Marvel Netflix show as being my favorite, so know that I only do this when I've found a truly exceptional example. Case in point, Virtue of the Vicious. This episode uses the exact same storytelling device as the Batman the Animated Series episode POV, in which we are told the same story from different characters' point of view. Here, we have different characters sharing their eyewitness account of one of the Punisher's attacks. The episode is a breath of fresh air at the latter end of the season, as it is so unique from all the other episodes. Plus, the non-linear storytelling style maintains your attention all the way through. And of course, the episode gives you a clear insight of each character's views on the Punisher. Some see him as a hero, others see him as a terrorist, and some just see him as a nutjob. Brilliant writing and exceptional pacing. This episode was like the surprise inside of a cereal box. Something unexpected and fun inside something that's already a tasty treat.
Favorite line.
Very much like your standard 80s action movie, this show is chock full of great one-liners.
Oh, dear Lord God in heaven.
Not exactly.
But my favorite line comes courtesy of Micro's wife.
Are those men gonna kill him?
If he doesn't kill him first, all he wants is a chance.
I hope he does it. Those men, they deserve to go to hell, and I hope he sends them there.
Now, why the hell wasn't this clip in the trailer? And while I'm voicing my grievances,
Meaningless fanboy gripes.
so they finally introduced the Punisher's battle van, and we never saw it in action. No car chase, no cool weapons popping out of the sides, nothing. Oh, and here's another question. Where the hell was the minigun? They totally cock-teased us with the minigun at the end of Daredevil Season 2. And during one of the promos. And we never see it. 13 episodes went by, no minigun. Come on guys, the hot toy of the Punisher comes with the minigun. Look, I'm not gonna ask again. That freaking minigun better show up in the first episode of Punisher Season 2, or someone is gonna be punished. And that concludes
Meaningless fanboy gripes. Final verdict.
Okay, so this is not the best Marvel Netflix show, that particular title still being debated between Daredevil, Jessica Jones, and Luke Cage. And yes, this show does have a few noticeable flaws, like a few recycled elements from their previous shows, as well as tackling a few real-world subjects that might have been a little out of place in a show based on a comic book. But ultimately, I respect the creator's ambition. The show was the hard-edged, hyper-violent, dark drama that it was supposed to be. Jon Bernthal is undisputably the best Punisher. Sorry, Thomas Jane. And I think we can all agree that this is the absolute best Punisher adaptation thus far. So, 10 points in that badassitude meter. Check your ammo, gas up the battle van, and give it a watch. Until next time, I'm ERod, and I'm the Blockbuster Buster.